In the late 19th century, 266 American sailors died in a tragic explosion, and two newspaper owners used their deaths to make millions while pushing an entire nation into war. Welcome back to Arnie's Brain Train, where history explodes to life, and we transform mind-blowing mysteries into thrilling discoveries. I'm Alex Arnold, and today we're time traveling to 1898 to uncover the most shocking media manipulation in American history. How yellow journalism literally started a war. This tale will change how you view news forever, and trust me, by the end, you'll have the superpower to spot when someone's trying to manipulate your emotions for profit. All of my sources are listed in the description below, so buckle up and let's hop aboard for this incredible journey through time. Here we go. America in 1898. We're in the heart of the Gilded Age, where robber barons rule and America is transforming from a backwater nation into a global powerhouse. The economy is booming, skyscrapers are rising, and American confidence is at an all-time high. But here's the crucial part. This is the world before TV, before radio, and before the internet. If you wanted news, you pretty much had only one option: newspapers. And newspapers weren't just for information back then. They were entertainment, gossip, politics, and reality all rolled into one. Whatever got printed in black and white became truth for millions of Americans. Just think about one person controlling your entire understanding of the world. That's pretty much what the newspaper owners did back then. Meanwhile, just 90 miles south of Florida, a brutal colonial war was raging in Cuba. Spanish forces were fighting Cuban rebels seeking independence, and stories of concentration camps, executions, and suffering were trickling back to American shores. For most Americans, Cuba might as well have been on Mars. They knew nothing about it except what they read in the papers. And then here come our two media titans about to wage the ultimate circulation war. William Randolph Hearst, 35-year-old heir to a mining fortune who'd bought the struggling New York Journal, and Joseph Pulitzer, the Hungarian immigrant who'd built the New York World into America's most successful newspaper. These men were definitely not journalists. They were locked in a deathmatch for readers, advertisers, and influence, and they discovered something terrifying. Sensationalism sold newspapers like nothing else. These guys invented the playbook for modern media manipulation. Every clickbait headline, every outrage-inducing social media post, every news story designed to make you angry rather than informed, it all traces back to what we're about to uncover. So what exactly was yellow journalism? Think of it as the toxic great-grandfather of today's clickbait culture, but with the power to literally start wars. The name itself came from a popular comic strip character called the Yellow Kid that both newspapers fought to publish. But yellow journalism was no joke. It was a deliberate strategy of sensational headlines, exaggerated stories, emotional manipulation, and sometimes completely fabricated news. Hearst and Pulitzer discovered that readers didn't just want information. They craved drama, emotion, and excitement. A boring headline like "Diplomatic tensions continue in Cuba" might sell a few papers, but "Spanish monsters torture innocent Cubans" would fly off the newsstands. According to David Nassau's biography, The Chief, Hearst famously dispatched artist Frederick Remington to Cuba to illustrate the conflict. When Remington cabled back that everything was quiet and there was no war to illustrate, Hearst allegedly replied, "Please remain. You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." He literally planned to create a conflict to boost his circulation numbers. Pulitzer, not to be outdone, filled his world with heart-wrenching tales of Spanish cruelty. His reporters interviewed Cuban refugees in New York, then dramatically embellished their stories for maximum emotional impact. Both newspapers began running daily front-page coverage of alleged Spanish atrocities, often based on rumors, speculation, or complete fiction. The competition ended up becoming so intense that both papers started employing the exact same tactics. Massive headlines that screamed across the entire front page, emotional illustrations showing Spanish soldiers as monsters, and stories designed to make readers feel personally threatened by events happening thousands of miles away. And here's the brilliant psychological trick they discovered. If you make people feel afraid and angry, they'll buy your newspaper every single day to find out what horrible thing happened next. They were literally addicting readers to outrage. Sound familiar? This is exactly how social media algorithms work today. They've learned that the angry, scared, or outraged users engage more, click more, and stay on platforms longer. Your attention is being manipulated using tactics perfected 125 years ago. Now, into this powder keg of manufactured tension comes a real tragedy that would change everything. February 15th, 1898, 9:40 p.m. The USS Maine, a massive 6,682-ton battleship, sits peacefully anchored in Havana Harbor. This wasn't an invasion force. President McKinley had sent the Maine on a friendly visit to protect American citizens and show the flag during Cuba's ongoing rebellion. Most of the 374 officers and sailors aboard were settling in for the night. Some were writing letters home, others playing cards or reading. Captain Charles Sigsbee was in his cabin writing a letter to his wife. It was just another quiet evening in paradise. Then, at exactly 9:40 p.m., boom, a catastrophic explosion erupted from deep within the ship's hull, so powerful it literally launched parts of the Maine hundreds of feet into the air. The forward third of the massive warship was obliterated instantly. Twisted metal, debris, and bodies rained down on the harbor. 266 American sailors died in that explosion. Sons, fathers, brothers, men who joined the Navy to see the world and serve their country. They died not in glorious battle, but in a tragic accident that no one could have prevented. And this is where our two worlds collide. Within hours, before any investigation could even begin, before rescue operations were complete, before the dead could even be counted, Hearst and Pulitzer's newspapers were already screaming that Spain had committed an act of war. The New York Journal's headline the next morning, "The Maine was destroyed by treachery." Pulitzer's World declared, "Maine explosion caused by bomb or torpedo." Both papers included detailed illustrations showing Spanish divers attaching explosive to the ship's hull. Pure fiction presented as fact. The truth? Modern investigations, including a comprehensive 1976 study by Admiral Hyman Rickover, concluded that the explosion was almost certainly accidental, likely caused by a coal bunker fire that ignited the ship's ammunition stores. Coal fires were a known hazard on steam-powered warships of that era. But of course, Hearst and Pulitzer weren't going to let little things like facts or evidence get in their way. They had found their golden goose, a real tragedy that they could exploit for maximum profit and circulation. According to W.A. Swanberg's Citizen Hearst, the journal's circulation exploded from 150,000 to over 1 million copies during the weeks following the Maine explosion. Pulitzer's World saw similar gains, with some editions selling over 1.3 million copies. They were literally profiting from the deaths of 266 American sailors. Think about how quickly misinformation spreads today after tragedies or major events. Before investigations are complete, before facts are known, speculation and conspiracy theories flood social media. The pattern is exactly the same. People rushing to profit from tragedy and uncertainty. With the Maine explosion as their ammunition, Hearst and Pulitzer launched the most sophisticated propaganda campaign in American history up to that point. The journal hired experts to provide scientific explanations for how Spain had destroyed the Maine. These weren't real experts, they were writers and illustrators creating detailed diagrams showing underwater mines, torpedo attacks, and sabotage missions. One famous illustration showed Spanish divers swimming up to the Maine with explosives. A complete fantasy that thousands of Americans believed was photographic evidence. Pulitzer's World published exclusive interviews with Maine survivors who'd claimed they'd seen suspicious Spanish activity before the explosion. Problem was, most of these interviews were completely fabricated, and the few real survivors consistently said that they had no idea what caused the blast. Both newspapers began running daily front-page stories about Spanish concentration camps in Cuba, and while Spanish tactics were indeed brutal, the newspapers exaggerated every detail for maximum emotional impact. They described Spanish General Valeriano Weyler as the Butcher and claimed that he was personally torturing innocent Cuban women and children. The slogan, "Remember the Maine, to hell with the Spain," became America's rallying cry. It was printed on banners, sung in songs, chanted at rallies, and plastered across newspaper headlines from coast to coast. Hearst and Pulitzer had successfully transformed a tragic accident into a call for war. And it gets even more diabolical. Both newspapers began publishing fake patriotic letters from readers demanding war. They claimed these came from concerned Americans across the country, but many were actually written by newspaper staff to create the illusion of nationwide outrage. The psychological manipulation was brilliant, but terrifying. First, they made Americans afraid of Spanish monsters threatening innocent Cubans. Then they made them angry about the Maine explosion. Finally, they made them feel guilty and unpatriotic if they didn't support war. Any politician or citizen who suggested caution was branded a coward or a Spanish sympathizer. Hearst even went so far as to charter a yacht and sail to Cuba with a team of reporters, photographers, and artists to document the coming war. He was so confident his propaganda would work that he was already preparing to cover the conflict that he had helped create. According to journalism historian Frank Luther Mott in American Journalism, circulation wars had existed before, but never had newspapers wielded such concentrated power to shape public opinion on matters of war and peace. I just want you to notice how they used a three-step process: fear, anger, then shame. Modern propaganda still follows this exact playbook, whether it's political campaigns, corporate marketing, or social media manipulation. Watch for these same emotional triggers being used to bypass your rational thinking. The yellow press had successfully created a powder keg of public opinion, and now it was about to explode. Within weeks of the Maine incident, massive pro-war rallies were erupting across America. In New York, crowds of thousands gathered outside newspaper offices, cheering every new headline about Spanish atrocities. In Chicago, protesters burned Spanish flags and demanded immediate military action. From Boston to San Francisco, the message was the same: remember the Maine, to hell with the Spain. Politicians, seeing which way the wind was blowing, jumped on the war bandwagon faster than you can say yellow journalism. Senators who had never shown interest in Cuba suddenly became passionate advocates for Cuban freedom. Congressmen who couldn't find Cuba on a map were giving fiery speeches about American honor and duty. President William McKinley found himself in an impossible position. A cautious, peace-loving man who'd served in the Civil War and seen its horrors firsthand, McKinley desperately wanted to avoid conflict. He knew the Maine explosion was suspicious and preferred diplomatic solutions. But the public pressure became absolutely overwhelming. Crowds gathered outside the White House chanting, "Remember the Maine," and "Coward McKinley." The newspapers portrayed any hesitation as weakness and unpatriotic cowardice. According to Margaret Leach's In the Days of McKinley, the president confided to friends that he was being forced into a war that he didn't want by a public opinion manufactured by irresponsible newspapers. Meanwhile, Spain was actually trying to avoid war too. The Spanish government offered to negotiate, to grant Cuba autonomy, even to pay compensation for the Maine. But reasonable solutions don't sell newspapers, and Hearst and Pulitzer buried these diplomatic overtures on back pages while screaming for blood on the front pages. The manipulation finally reached its peak when both newspapers began publishing war preparation stories, detailed accounts of American military mobilization, heroic volunteer soldiers, and exciting predictions of quick victory. They made war seem not just necessary, but thrilling and glorious. On March 28, 1898, a naval court of inquiry concluded that the Maine had been destroyed by an external explosion, though they admitted that they couldn't determine who was responsible. This ambiguous finding was exactly what the Yellow Press needed. They immediately declared it proof of Spanish sabotage, even though the evidence was circumstantial at best. Finally, on April 11th, McKinley caved to the overwhelming pressure and asked Congress for authorization to use military force in Cuba. His speech was reluctant and somber, but Congress was already in a war frenzy. The resolution passed overwhelmingly, with only a handful of brave representatives voting against what they knew was a manufactured crisis. According to historian David M. Kennedy in The American Pageant, this marked a turning point when American foreign policy began being driven more by media manipulation and public emotion than by careful diplomatic consideration. Just think for a second about how social media campaigns can now mobilize millions of people around political causes in just days or hours. The tools have changed, but the psychology of mass manipulation remains exactly the same. Understand this, and you can have immunity against modern information warfare. The Spanish-American War lasted exactly 116 days, one of the shortest wars in American history, but one with consequences that reshaped the entire world. American forces, fueled by manufactured outrage and yellow journalism propaganda, swept through Spanish positions in Cuba and the Philippines with surprising ease. The Spanish military, demoralized and unprepared, offered little effective resistance. Theodore Roosevelt became a national hero, leading his Rough Riders cavalry unit. American newspapers covered every battle with sensational headlines and heroic illustrations. But continuing in their twisted fashion, even as the war was being fought, Hearst and Pulitzer continued profiting from the conflict they'd helped create. Battle reports, hero stories, and victory celebrations sold newspapers by the millions. The more dramatic and emotional the coverage, the more money they made. The war's end brought stunning American victories. Spain surrendered Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. America emerged from the conflict as a genuine world power, with overseas territories and global influence for the first time in its history. But the cost was absolutely devastating for Spain. Their 400-year-old empire crumbled virtually overnight. Thousands of Spanish and Cuban soldiers died in a war that might never have happened without media manipulation. And the 266 American sailors who died on the Maine became martyrs for a cause based on lies. The most tragic irony of all is that by 1976, when Admiral Rickover's investigation finally proved the Maine explosion was accidental, it no longer mattered. The war had been fought, empires had fallen, and America had been transformed into a global superpower, all based on fake news and manufactured consent. According to historian Walter Mills in The Martial Spirit, the Spanish-American War marked the moment when America learned it could use media manipulation to justify military interventions, a lesson that would be repeated many times in the following century. Hearst and Pulitzer, meanwhile, became even richer and more powerful. They'd proven that newspapers could literally create reality by manipulating public emotions. The success of their yellow journalism campaign inspired imitators across the country and established the template for modern media manipulation. This pattern of media-driven war fever has repeated throughout American history, from the Gulf of Tonkin incident that escalated the Vietnam War to the weapons of mass destruction claims that justified the Iraq War. The playbook remains remarkably similar to what Hearst and Pulitzer perfected in 1898. The Spanish-American War proved something terrifying about human nature. Entire populations can be manipulated into supporting wars through emotional manipulation rather than rational argument. Hearst and Pulitzer had discovered the perfect formula for manufacturing consent. Take a real tragedy, add sensational speculation, create emotional urgency, then shame anyone who questions the narrative. This became the blueprint for media manipulation that's still used today. But their success also created a backlash. By 1900, many Americans were beginning to question the sensationalist press. Magazines like McClure's began practicing investigative journalism based on facts rather than sensationalism. The muckraking movement emerged partly as a reaction against yellow journalism's lies and distortions. Professional journalism schools were established to teach ethics and fact-checking. The Society of Professional Journalists was founded in 1909 with a code of ethics specifically designed to prevent another yellow journalism disaster. Many newspapers began adopting editorial standards and fact-checking procedures. Yet even with all this, the legacy persisted. Throughout the 20th century, the techniques perfected by Hearst and Pulitzer continued appearing in different forms: wartime propaganda, political advertising, corporate marketing, and eventually social media manipulation. According to media historian Michael Schudson in Discovering the News, yellow journalism never really died. It just evolved with new technologies and platforms. Today, we see the exact same psychological tricks in social media algorithms that promote outrage over information, political campaigns that prioritize emotional manipulation over policy discussion, news outlets that chase clicks rather than truth, conspiracy theories that spread faster than facts, or corporate marketing that exploits fear and insecurity. The tools might have changed from printing presses to smartphones, but the human psychology remains exactly the same. We're still vulnerable to the same emotional manipulation that Hearst and Pulitzer perfected 125 years ago. Now that you can understand the historical pattern, you can recognize when modern media is trying to manipulate your emotions. Ask yourself, who benefits if I feel angry, afraid, or outraged by this story? What facts are being emphasized or ignored? Is this designed to inform me or to inflame me? Here's an interesting footnote to our story. While Hearst continued using sensationalist tactics throughout his career, Joseph Pulitzer eventually experienced something like a crisis of conscience. By 1903, Pulitzer had begun transitioning the world away from yellow journalism toward more serious, fact-based reporting. He established editorial standards, hired professional journalists, and began emphasizing accuracy over sensationalism. Most importantly, he used his enormous wealth to create something that would outlast his newspaper empire. In 1912, Pulitzer donated $2 million to Columbia University to establish the Pulitzer School of Journalism, now the Columbia Journalism School, and the Pulitzer Prizes. These awards, first given in 1917, specifically honor excellence in journalism, literature, and musical composition, emphasizing the very qualities that yellow journalism had abandoned: accuracy, fairness, and public service. It really is quite the irony that the man who helped perfect media manipulation also created the most prestigious award for ethical journalism. Pulitzer's name became synonymous with the highest standards of reporting rather than the lowest. According to James McGrath Morris, in Pulitzer, A Life in Politics, Print, and Power, Pulitzer spent his final years deeply conflicted about his role in the Spanish-American War and worked to rebuild journalism's credibility and ethical foundation. Today, when reporters receive Pulitzer Prizes for exposing government corruption, investigating corporate wrongdoing, or revealing important truths, they're being honored by an institution created by someone who understood both the destructive power of manipulative media and the essential role of honest journalism in democracy. Hearst, on the other hand, never showed similar regrets. He continued building his media empire using sensationalist tactics, eventually inspiring the classic film Citizen Kane, which portrayed a newspaper magnate corrupted by power and ambition. Even people who make terrible mistakes can learn, grow, and work to repair the damage that they've caused. Pulitzer's transformation shows that recognizing our errors and working to fix them is always possible, no matter how much harm we might have caused. And there you have it, guys, the mind-blowing story of how 266 sailors died, 2 press barons made millions, and yellow journalism literally started a war that transformed America into a global empire. From the ashes of this media manipulation disaster came important lessons about the responsibility that comes with the power to shape public opinion. Understanding this history gives you the ultimate superpower: immunity against modern information warfare and the ability to think critically about the news that you consume every day. If you enjoyed this journey through history, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to Arnie's Brain Train for more thrilling adventures through humanity's biggest mysteries. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our weekly expeditions through the most incredible stories that history has to offer. And of course, I want to hear from you. What other historical conspiracies, media manipulations, or mind-blowing mysteries should we explore next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Remember, we're where history explodes to life and complex ideas become crystal clear. All of my sources for today's adventure are listed in the description. And until next time, keep that curiosity burning bright and never stop questioning what you're told. And of course, life isn't always this simple, but it's always this interesting. All aboard the Brain Train. We'll see you guys next time.